Okay, so before I begin with the top 5 worst, I just want to say that they're not really the top 5 worst animes ever. The ones that are like the worst ever are the ones that they're like little kids and they're all shrieking at each other throughout the whole show, and they make those really stupid inhuman faces with like the X's and on their eyes and stupid stuff like that. That's completely annoying and no one watches. The ones I'm about to talk about are the ones that had potential and they sort of fell flat. So they're not really the top 5 worst, they're just sort of the top 5 meh. So, without further ado, at number 5 on the top 5 meh, please don't kill me, is Elfin Lied. Okay, with this show, the beginning was so badass. It was so cool. There's this naked chick with a helmet, and she's walking around killing people with her mind, and not just like killing people, like annihilating them, like gutting them and ripping their heads and limbs off, and it's all telepathic, and it was so cool. And I was like, this is the best show I've ever watched in my life. And then it cut to the next scene. And granted, this was the English dubbed version. I couldn't get my hands on the Japanese language version. They cut to the next scene, and there were these two people, and they're running, and they started talking to each other, and it was the worst acting I've ever encountered in my life. It was so bad. It was completely intolerable, and I didn't make it past the part where she comes out of the water. Alright, number 4 is Sailor Moon, which was really hard for me to put on this list, because when I was a kid, I was obsessed with it. Like, I had all the merchandise you could possibly think of. I had t-shirts, I had jewelry, stuffed animals, play action figures, I had tapestries of it hanging on my walls. Like, literal tapestries. And I watched it recently for nostalgic purposes, and God, it was the stupidest thing I'd ever watched. I wanted to punch Serena in the face. She was crying all the time, this stupid little bitch. And then, with the morphing, like, do they really expect us to believe that the villains are just sitting there going, oh, she's changing. I'll wait for 5 minutes. If I were a villain, I'd freaking rip her apart at that point. That's her biggest weakness. Number 3 is Bleach. And this is because the manga rocks. And the anime falls short of that, mostly because of all the fillers. I mean, there's like 40 seasons of it. Like, come on, you know that they didn't write that many graphic novels. You know it. Number 2 is Naruto. And it's pretty much for the same reason as Bleach, because of all the fillers. The only reason I'm putting Naruto above Bleach is because it's a little more juvenile. I kind of got sick of Naruto yelling about everything. At number 1 is Darker Than Black, which is basically the skeleton of a good show. It was a good idea that didn't follow through. It was the same thing every time. Like, it was this ninja assassin dude who, like, went and killed all these people who had sold their souls for superpowers and then had to do these nervous tick type things so that they could keep the powers. And then they had all these questions that they never answered, ever. Like, why are the gates there? And what's wrong with the sky? And why doesn't the main character have that weird nervous tick thing? Which I actually have a theory about. I think when they gave him the powers, they were like, yeah, you can be like a super ninja, but you have to wear this mask the whole time and look like David Bowie. I think that was his thing. So there's that question answered, not by a writer. For the top 5 best animes, at number 5 is Cardcaptors, which I'm going to be a super huge hypocrite right now because they do the same morphing thing that Sailor Moon does, but that was another one that I watched as a kid that I was really into, and I watched it again recently, and I was still interested in it, which I think that's the mark of a good show, that it holds its own through time. Number 4 is Eden of the East, which there's not much to say except it had a very clever plot and the characters were very fleshed out and unique, and there was a great balance of comedy and drama, so what more could you ask from a show? The only reason it's so far down the list is because it was too short. I wanted more. Number 3 is Blood Plus, which I adored. I mean, there aren't very many shows that are so fearless and bold. They respected their audience enough to believe that they were intelligent to sit down after they've watched it and rationalize what they just did, which, if anyone has seen it, then you know I'm talking about that statutory rape part, which everyone was horrified by, and rightfully so, because it was disgusting. It was appalling, and I couldn't believe they did it, but I think it was so important, because before that episode, all Saya had to go on was people telling her to kill her sister. They weren't really giving her any context as to why, technically, Diva hadn't done anything wrong to Saya. And she needed to cross some sort of line. And what better way to do that than to have her rape a little 12-year-old boy, bear his children, and then take on his image. I think that's enough to have her sister murder her ass. Okay, up next are number 2 and number 1, and this decision had me up until 4 in the morning, because the one I eventually placed at number 2 is my favorite anime of all time. And my reasoning for putting it at number 2 is that even though it's my favorite, it's not perfect, and it has a very large gaping flaw. So at number 2 is Death Note, which was just so mind-bogglingly good. The characters were so meaty and real and had this beautiful arc to all of them. And then there was N. And the difference between L and N was that L was completely brilliant, but he was willing to admit that he was human and he makes mistakes, and he was human and he did make mistakes, particularly in trusting Light. So he was just very three-dimensional. And then there was N, who was two-dimensional and robotic and was completely perfect and added no conflict whatsoever and was boring. And it made me not like the rest of the show, except for the very end of the last episode where Light gets caught, because his reaction was just so real and raw and human, and it was exactly how a young, brilliant, ingenious, psychopathic serial killer would react to getting caught. And it was brilliant. Alright, and my pick for number 1 is... drumroll, please! No? Okay, well, it's Avatar: The Last Airbender. Woo! Okay, so my reason for picking this is because it's kind of flawless. I mean, the characters are so fleshed out and have great character arcs, and the plot has so much substance and weight to it, and the comedy and drama balance just works. It meshes perfectly. Even though the comedy is a little juvenile, it does appeal to adults. I mean, my mom would be in the other room, and she'd hear it, and she'd start laughing, and she'd come out and watch it. And this is the woman who thinks I'm so weird because I watch cartoons, and she was coming out and watching it, so that's gotta say something about it. And then the music was phenomenal. It was like orchestration from a feature film. It was fantastic. And then, of course, the sheer aesthetics of it. I mean, even if you don't like anime, just put it on mute and just marvel at the beauty of it. It was just gorgeous to watch, especially the last episode. That was beautiful. So, those are my lists. You can start trolling now. Bye!